I'm Lieutenant Commander Summer Hansen, 36 years old, one of the few women to earn a SEAL Trident and lead operators in combat. For years I served quietly, sending letters home no one answered, believing duty and family could coexist if I just worked hard enough. But when my own parents filed a motion to erase me from our family trust while I was deployed overseas, I had to decide whether to stay silent or stand up. That choice changed everything. Have you ever been dismissed or betrayed by someone you gave everything to? If so, tell me your story in the comments. You're not alone. Before I get into what happened, let me know where you're tuning in from. And if you've ever had to reclaim your worth after being undervalued, hit that like button and subscribe for more true stories about setting boundaries and standing your ground. What happened next might surprise you. I stood in my childhood bedroom 3 weeks before the hearing, staring at a stack of legal documents that had arrived while I was overseas. The sunset through the window cast orange light across papers that detailed my parents' attempt to dissolve my stake in the family trust. My father's signature sat at the bottom of the third page, bold and decisive as always. My mother's followed, smaller but equally final. They'd filed the motion 6 months earlier, timing it perfectly with my deployment to the Gulf. The attorney's language was clinical. Petitioner Summer Hansen has demonstrated prolonged absence from familial obligations and has forfeited reasonable claim to estate distribution. I read it twice, then set it down carefully, the same way I'd learned to handle ordnance. No emotion, just process. The house felt smaller than I remembered. My old debate team trophies still lined one shelf, dusty and forgotten. A framed photo from high school graduation showed me in cap and gown, smiling at something outside the frame. My parents weren't in the picture. They'd been there that day, I think, but I couldn't remember them actually watching me cross the stage. That pattern had started early. When I'd called home from Coronado after Hell Week, my mother had said, "That's nice, dear," before passing the phone to my father. He'd asked if I was finished with this phase yet. I told him I'd just completed the hardest week of training in the U.S. military. He'd said, "Call us when you have a real job." I walked downstairs to find my father in his study, working through case files with the same intensity he'd brought to every task for as long as I'd known him. Charles Hansen, senior partner, corporate litigator, a man who viewed every interaction as a negotiation. He didn't look up when I entered. "You're home," he said, marking something in red ink. "Your mother's at the club. She'll be back for dinner." I placed the legal documents on his desk, aligned with the edge. He glanced at them, then at me, and I saw something flicker in his expression. Not guilt. Recognition, maybe, that I'd actually read them. "You should have been more involved," he said simply. "You chose to disappear for years at a time. The trust requires active participation in family affairs." "I was deployed," I said, "leading a platoon in hostile territory." He set down his pen with deliberate care. "Summer, I respect that you've pursued this military interest. But playing soldier doesn't exempt you from real-world responsibilities." I felt my jaw tighten, but I kept my voice level. "I'm a lieutenant commander. I've earned 3 Bronze Stars and a Navy Commendation Medal. I'm not playing anything." "Then perhaps you should have played daughter more convincingly." He picked up his pen again, dismissing me. "The hearing is in 3 weeks. Bring counsel if you like. The outcome won't change." I left without another word. In the kitchen, I found evidence of my mother's afternoon. Teacup in the sink, society newsletter on the counter, her reading glasses folded beside it. Ellen Hansen had perfected the art of existing beautifully in carefully controlled spaces. Our home had always looked like a magazine spread, everything positioned for maximum aesthetic effect. Including me, until I'd refused to cooperate with the composition. That evening, she came home carrying bags from boutiques whose names I didn't recognize. She saw me at the kitchen table and paused, arranging her face into pleasant surprise. "Summer, how long are you staying?" As if I were a house guest. As if I hadn't grown up sleeping 2 floors above where we stood. "Through the hearing," I said. "I thought you might want to discuss it." She set down her bags and smoothed her hair, a nervous gesture I remembered from childhood. "Your father handles the legal matters. I'm sure he's explained the situation fairly. He's trying to erase me from the family trust." "That's dramatic." She moved to the refrigerator, not looking at me. He's restructuring assets. You've been absent, honey. You haven't contributed to maintaining the family home. You didn't help with your grandmother's estate. You've missed every important family event for 5 years. What did you expect? I expected you to defend me once. The words came out quieter than I'd intended. Just once. She turned then, and for a moment I saw something genuine in her face. Pain, maybe. Or just discomfort at having the pleasant surface disrupted. I've always defended you, she said softly. In my own way. But you made choices, Summer. You chose this military life over us. I chose to serve my country. You chose to run away. She closed the refrigerator without taking anything out. And now you're upset that we moved on without you. The conversation ended there, as most of our conversations did, with me absorbing the blow and her retreating into the safety of surfaces. I went upstairs and called my executive officer from the sat phone I kept for emergencies. He answered on the second ring, and I briefed him on the situation with the same efficiency I'd use for an operational update. He listened without interrupting, then said, "You need anything from us, Skipper?" I told him I'd handle it. He said, "I know you will. But the offer stands." After we hung up, I sat in the dark for a long time, thinking about the difference between the family you're born into and the one you build in the teens. The next morning, I went to the county clerk's office and requested copies of all filings related to the trust. The clerk, a tired woman with kind eyes, printed everything without question. I spread the documents across my hotel bed that night and began the analysis. My father's attorney had built a careful case: my absence during family emergencies, my failure to attend quarterly trust meetings, my lack of correspondence regarding estate planning. Every point was technically accurate. Every point ignored the reason for my absence. I'd been in the Arabian Sea, in the Philippines, in training rotations that couldn't be interrupted for tea parties and investment discussions. I drafted a response that night, clinical and precise. I outlined my service record, my deployments, my promotions. I included documentation of every attempt I'd made to stay connected, emails sent from forward operating bases, satellite calls from ships, letters mailed during the rare moments of downtime. Most had gone unanswered. I'd kept copies of everything, the same way I kept copies of every operational order and mission brief. Documentation mattered. Evidence mattered. The truth, properly presented, mattered. By the end of the week, I had a strategy. Not just for the hearing, but for something larger. I'd spent 10 years earning respect through action, proving myself in environments where failure meant death. I'd learned that real authority didn't come from titles or expectations. It came from competence, from discipline, from being the person others could count on when everything went wrong. My parents had raised me with the opposite philosophy. Authority came from position, from name, from the social architecture they'd spent decades constructing. The hearing would test which philosophy held more weight in a place that supposedly valued truth. I pressed my service dress blues the night before I filed my response. The uniform felt like armor. Not protection, exactly. Accountability. The summons had arrived on a Tuesday in March, forwarded through 3 different mail systems before reaching me aboard the USS Essex. I'd been in a planning session when the communications officer knocked and handed me the envelope marked "Legal Notice, Time Sensitive." My platoon chief, Marcus Duran, had glanced at the return address and raised an eyebrow. "California Civil Court? What did you do, Skipper?" I'd opened it carefully, aware of the roomful of operators watching. The first page spelled it out clearly: Hansen Family Trust Dissolution Proceedings, my parents as petitioners, me as respondent. Marcus had leaned closer, reading over my shoulder, then said quietly, "That's cold." I'd excused myself and taken the documents to my stateroom. The motion ran 17 pages, dense with legal language that boiled down to a simple narrative. I'd abandoned my family obligations, chosen military service over familial duty, and therefore forfeited any reasonable claim to inheritance. The supporting evidence was meticulous. Missed holidays, unanswered invitations, years of silence. What it didn't mention was that most of those invitations had come with conditions. Come home and act normal. Come home and pretend you're not who you've become. Come home and admit this military phase is ending. I'd tried video calling my father that night, but he'd declined the call. I tried my mother an hour later. She'd answered, her face pixelated and distant on the screen. Summer, is something wrong? Everything about her tone suggested she knew exactly why I was calling. I'd kept my voice steady, professional. The trust dissolution. I need to understand why you're doing this now. She'd glanced off camera, probably checking if my father was listening. It's complicated, honey. Your father thinks it's best. You've been gone so long, and the trust requires active family members. It's not personal. It's entirely personal. I'd heard the edge in my own voice and pulled it back. I've been serving overseas. I've been doing exactly what I trained to do. And we're very proud, she'd said unconvincingly. But pride doesn't change the practical realities. You haven't been here, Summer. You've built a life that doesn't include us. Because you never wanted to be included in mine. The silence had stretched thin across the satellite connection. Finally, she'd said, your father wants what's best for the family assets. That's all this is. Asset management. Then she'd made an excuse about dinner and ended the call. I'd sat in the dim light of my stateroom, listening to the ship's ventilation system and feeling something crack in my chest. Not heartbreak. Something older and deeper. The final severing of an illusion I'd been maintaining for years. Commander Jacob Vaughn had found me on deck the next morning, staring at the horizon. He'd served 30 years, seen enough broken operators to recognize the signs. Want to talk about it? I'd shaken my head, but he'd stayed anyway, leaning against the rail beside me. After a few minutes, I'd told him the basics. He'd listened without offering platitudes, then said, family can be the hardest mission you'll ever face. Harder than anything we do out here, because out here the rules make sense. He'd paused, watching a supply helicopter approach from the port side. You know what you need to do? I'd nodded. He'd clapped my shoulder once and walked away, leaving me with the decision I'd already made. The flight home took 36 hours with layovers. I'd used the time to draft my legal response, working through the logic like I'd work through an operational plan. Identify the objective. Assess available assets. Determine the optimal approach. My objective was simple, not to win money or property, but to force accountability. To make them see, in a public forum, exactly who they'd tried to erase. My assets were my service record, my documented attempts at connection, and the truth. My approach would be direct, professional, and absolutely uncompromising. I landed at San Diego on a Friday morning and drove north, watching the coastline blur past. The landscape felt both familiar and alien, like returning to a place you've only seen in photographs. I checked into a hotel near the courthouse rather than staying at my parents' house. I needed neutral ground, space to prepare without their presence clouding my focus. That weekend, I met with a civilian attorney Marcus had recommended, a former JAG officer who specialized in estate disputes. She'd reviewed the case and given me the odds straight. Your parents have a strong position legally. But legally strong doesn't always mean right, and judges are human. If you can present yourself as the wronged party without appearing vindictive, you have a chance. I'd asked what she meant by appearing. She'd smiled slightly. Dress uniform. Full medals. Let them see exactly what your parents are dismissing. It felt theatrical, manipulative even. But I'd understood the logic. Perception mattered in court the same way it mattered in negotiations with foreign military partners. You had to establish credibility before anyone would listen to your argument. I'd told her I'd think about it. That night, I'd taken out my service dress blues and inspected them under the hotel room's harsh lighting. The uniform represented every sacrifice I'd made, every choice that had led me away from the life my parents had planned. The trident pinned above my ribbons marked me as one of fewer than 300 women to complete BUD/S and earn the SEAL designation. I'd bled for this. I'd nearly died for it more than once. If wearing it to court was theater, then so be it. Sometimes the most powerful truth needs a stage. The call from my mother came Sunday evening. I'd almost let it go to voicemail, but something made me answer. Her voice sounded strained. Summer, your father and I would like you to come to dinner tomorrow. Before the hearing. We should talk. I'd waited, suspecting a strategy session, an attempt to negotiate my silence. "What's there to talk about?" I'd asked. She'd hesitated, and I'd heard my father's voice in the background, too muted to make out words. "Just come," she'd said finally. "Please." I'd agreed, against my better judgment, and hung up wondering what they hoped to accomplish with one last dinner. The house looked exactly the same as I pulled into the driveway Monday evening: manicured lawn, perfectly trimmed hedges, exterior lighting that made everything look like a luxury real estate listing. I'd worn civilian clothes, dark jeans, and a simple blouse, trying to keep the evening as neutral as possible. My mother opened the door before I could knock, her smile tight and practiced. "Come in, honey. Dinner's almost ready." The smell of roasted chicken and herbs filled the entrance hall, domestic and deliberately welcoming. My father sat in the living room with a glass of scotch, still wearing his work clothes. He nodded when I entered, but didn't stand. "Summer." His greeting held no warmth, just acknowledgement. "Glad you could make it." I sat across from him, maintaining the distance. "You wanted to talk." "Your mother wanted to talk," he corrected. "I'm simply here to clarify the situation before tomorrow's hearing." He sipped his scotch, considering his words with a lawyer's precision. "This dissolution isn't meant to be vindictive. It's practical. You've built a life separate from this family, and the trust was designed for active participants. Continuing to include you would be dishonest to the trust's original intent." "The trust's original intent was to support family members," I said. "I'm still your daughter. Are you?" The question hung sharp between us. "Because from where I'm sitting, you've spent the last 10 years making it very clear that you don't need this family, don't want our approval, and don't value what we've built here. This military career is admirable in its way, but it's also a rejection of everything we tried to give you." My mother appeared in the doorway, wiping her hands on a towel. "Charles, please. That's not what we agreed to discuss." She looked at me, something almost apologetic in her expression. "We just want you to understand this isn't personal. It's about the integrity of the estate." "It's completely personal," I said quietly. "You're erasing me because I didn't become the person you wanted." My father leaned forward, his voice hardening. "We're protecting family assets from someone who stopped being family years ago. You made your choice when you enlisted. You chose strangers over us, combat over connection, discipline over love. Don't pretend to be surprised that choices have consequences." The words landed like physical blows, precise and designed to hurt. I felt my training kick in, the emotional distance I'd learned in situations where panic meant failure. I stood slowly, careful to keep my movements calm. "Thank you for dinner," I said to my mother. "But I think I should go." She'd started to protest, but my father cut her off. "Probably for the best. Tomorrow will be straightforward. Judge Langford is a reasonable man. He'll see the logic of our position." Something in his tone suggested he'd already decided the outcome, had already written my presence off as irrelevant. I walked to the door, my mother following. In the entrance hall, she caught my arm gently. "Summer, wait." Her voice dropped to almost a whisper. "Your father's hurt. You have to understand, he thought you'd come home after basic training. When you didn't, when you kept choosing the military over us, it felt like rejection. He's just protecting himself." I looked at her carefully, seeing the woman who'd spent 30 years managing my father's emotions instead of her own. "And what about you?" I asked. "Do you feel rejected?" She'd released my arm, her face settling back into its practiced composure. "I feel like I lost my daughter a long time ago. Tomorrow won't change that." It was the most honest thing she'd said to me in years. I left without responding, driving back to the hotel through empty streets, my mind already moving toward the hearing. The dinner had accomplished one thing: it had crystallized exactly what I was fighting for. Not money. Not property. Recognition. The simple acknowledgement that I existed, that my choices had value, that serving my country wasn't abandonment. Back in the hotel room, I laid out my uniform with parade ground precision. The dark blue jacket, the white cover, the ribbons arranged in perfect rows. Each medal represented specific actions: the Bronze Stars for valor in combat, the Navy Commendation for leadership during a hostage rescue, the others for various deployments and campaigns. I'd earned every piece of medal, every colored strip of fabric. Tomorrow, I'd wear them not as decoration, but as evidence. My attorney had been right. Sometimes you had to make people see you before they'd listen to you. I called Marcus that night, needing to hear a friendly voice. He answered from California, where his team was running drills. "How'd the family dinner go, Skipper?" I gave him the short version, hostile, predictable, clarifying. He'd laughed without humor. "Families, man. Give me enemy combatants any day. At least they're honest about wanting to kill you." We talked for a few minutes about nothing important: training schedules, mutual friends, the new crop of candidates going through BUD/S. Normal conversation with someone who understood the life I'd chosen. Before hanging up, he'd said, "You going to be okay tomorrow?" I told him I would be. He'd said, "I know. But I had to ask." Sleep came in fragments. I kept waking to check the clock. 0200 hours, 0400 hours, 0530. Finally, I gave up and went for a run along the beach, letting the rhythm of my feet against sand clear my mind. The sun rose over the ocean, turning the water gold and orange. I thought about all the sunrises I'd watched from ships, from forward operating bases, from training beaches at Coronado. Each one had marked another day of purpose, of working towards something larger than myself. Tomorrow would be another sunrise, another day of purpose. Just in a different kind of battle. I arrived at the courthouse at 0800 hours, parking in the public lot and walking through morning fog that hadn't burned off yet. The building was old stone and glass, built in the architectural style that said justice, without actually guaranteeing it. I'd worn my service dress blues, every detail inspection ready. The uniform drew stares from other people heading into the building, a few nods of respect, some curious glances, one older man who'd stopped and saluted. I'd returned it crisply and kept walking. My attorney met me on the courthouse steps, her expression approving. "Good call on the uniform. You look like exactly what you are." We ran through the plan one final time. She'd handle the legal arguments, I'd provide context and testimony when needed, and we'd let the facts speak for themselves. No emotional appeals, no dramatic speeches. Just the documented truth presented clearly. She'd squeezed my shoulder once. "Ready?" I'd nodded. "Always ready." Inside, the courtroom felt smaller than I'd expected, more administrative than dramatic. Wooden benches, fluorescent lighting, the seal of California mounted behind the judge's bench. My parents were already seated with their attorney, a sharp-looking woman named Sandra Lyle, who I recognized from my father's firm. She'd glanced up when I entered, and something flickered in her expression. Surprise, maybe recognition. My mother's face had gone carefully blank. My father had simply looked annoyed. "Really, Summer," he'd said, loud enough for half the courtroom to hear. "The uniform? This isn't a military tribunal. It's a civil proceeding." I'd taken my seat without responding. My attorney had leaned close and whispered, "He's rattled." Good. The bailiff called for everyone to rise, and Judge Michael Langford entered from chambers. He was in his late 60s, silver-haired and carrying himself with the careful posture of someone who'd spent time in uniform himself. He'd settled behind the bench, arranging papers, when his eyes landed on me. The reaction was subtle but immediate. His hand paused mid-movement. His eyes dropped to the trident on my chest, then rose to meet my gaze. "Lieutenant Commander Hansen." His voice held a question beneath the question, something personal breaking through judicial formality. "Yes, Your Honor." I'd stood at attention automatically, every piece of my bearing screaming military discipline. He'd set down his papers carefully, his hand not quite steady. "My God. Is that really her?" The words were almost too quiet, spoken more to himself than to the courtroom. But in the sudden silence, everyone heard. My father's attorney had started to stand, clearly confused by the judge's reaction. Judge Langford had waved her down, still staring at me. "Forgive me. I served in Vietnam. Navy, destroyer duty. I know what that trident means." He gestured to my chest, where the seal insignia was pinned. "I know what it costs." The courtroom had gone absolutely still. My mother's face showed genuine surprise for the first time I could remember. My father had shifted in his seat, discomfort written across his features. Judge Langford had cleared his throat, clearly trying to regain professional composure. Let's proceed. Ms. Lyle, I understand you're representing the petitioners. Sandra Lyle had stood, smoothing her jacket. Yes, Your Honor. We're here regarding the dissolution of the Hansen Family Trust, specifically the removal of Summer Hansen as a beneficiary due to prolonged absence and failure to fulfill trust obligations. She launched into her argument, reading from prepared notes about my lack of participation, my failure to attend required meetings, my general disengagement from family affairs. It was the same argument from the motion, polished for verbal delivery. She'd emphasized the trust's language requiring active family involvement and my documented record of absence. Judge Langford had listened patiently, making notes. When Sandra finished, he'd turned to my attorney. Ms. Chin, your response? My attorney had stood, and I'd felt the shift in strategy immediately. Your Honor, my client hasn't been absent. She's been serving her country as a Navy SEAL, deployed to combat zones, leading teams in operations that most people will never know about and can't discuss. The trust was created to support family members. Lieutenant Commander Hansen is a family member. Her parents' decision to remove her isn't about trust requirements. It's about punishing her for career choices they disapprove of. That's absurd, my father had interjected, earning a sharp look from Judge Langford. Mr. Hansen, you'll have your opportunity to speak. The judge had turned back to my attorney. Continue. She'd outlined the timeline of my service, my attempts to stay connected, the documented evidence of my parents' dismissal. Every email I'd sent from overseas and received no response to, every satellite call that went to voicemail, every invitation to visit me that was declined. She'd built a case not of my absence, but of their rejection. When she finished, Judge Langford had sat back, studying the paperwork in front of him. I'd like to hear from Lieutenant Commander Hansen directly. Commander, would you please take the stand? I'd stood and moved to the witness box, raising my right hand for the oath. The bailiff's voice had been steady. Do you swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth? I'd sworn it, the same way I'd sworn to defend the Constitution. Judge Langford had looked at me with something like curiosity. Commander, tell me about your service. Not the resume version. The real version. I'd taken a breath, choosing my words carefully. I enlisted at 19. I wanted to prove I could do something difficult, something meaningful. I went through BUD/S, graduated, earned my trident. I've deployed 6 times to 3 different theaters. I've led teams in direct action missions, trained partner forces, and brought everyone home alive. It's not the life my parents wanted for me, but it's the life I chose. And it's a life I'm proud of. Why didn't you participate in trust meetings? Because I was overseas, Your Honor. When my family held their quarterly meetings, I was usually on a ship or at a forward operating base with limited communication. I tried to participate remotely, but my requests were denied. Judge Langford had glanced at my father. Mr. Hansen, is that accurate? My father had stood reluctantly. We offered her the option to participate by phone on several occasions. She declined. That's not true. My voice had stayed level, but I'd felt anger rising. You scheduled meetings during deployments when you knew I couldn't call. You changed dates without notification. You made it impossible, then blamed me for not showing up. You're being dramatic, my mother had said quietly from her seat. We accommodated your schedule when we could. Judge Langford had held up a hand. Let's see the documentation. The next hour passed in a blur of paperwork and testimony. My attorney presented emails showing meeting schedule changes with no notice, requests for remote participation that went unanswered, invitations to family events scheduled during deployments my parents knew about because I'd informed them. Sandra Lyle had countered with evidence of my general unavailability, my long absences, my failure to maintain regular contact. It was a paper war. Documented battle lines drawn across years of miscommunication and deliberate distance. Judge Langford had studied everything methodically, occasionally asking questions. Commander, this email from your mother dated March 15, 2023. She's inviting you to a family dinner. Why didn't you respond? I'd explained I was in the middle of a training exercise with no internet access and had responded 5 days later, which the records showed. Mr. Hansen, This trust meeting on September 3rd, 2024. The invitation was sent to your daughter 1 week before the meeting, while she was deployed to the Arabian Gulf. Did you know she was deployed? My father had hesitated, then admitted he'd known. The pattern became clear through the documentation. My parents had created impossible conditions, then used my failure to meet them as justification for removal. It wasn't about the trust. It was about control, about forcing me to choose between my career and their approval. Judge Langford had finally set down the last document and removed his reading glasses, pinching the bridge of his nose. I've seen enough. This isn't a complicated case legally, but it's a sad one. Ms. Lyle, your clients have a technical argument about trust participation. But the evidence suggests they've systematically excluded their daughter from participation while blaming her for the exclusion. Sandra Lyle had stood immediately. Your Honor, with respect, the trust language is clear. Active participation is required. Lieutenant Commander Hansen has been overseas for extended periods. That's incompatible with the trust's requirements. And yet the trust allows for remote participation, which was repeatedly denied. Judge Langford had looked at my parents, his expression hardening. Mr. and Mrs. Hansen, I served in uniform. I understand the sacrifices military families make. What I don't understand is punishing your daughter for serving her country with distinction. He gestured to the ribbons on my chest. Do you know what those represent? The Bronze Star is for valor. She's earned 3. That means 3 separate times your daughter performed exceptionally under enemy fire. While she was doing that, you were scheduling trust meetings and marking her absent. My mother had looked down, her composure finally cracking. My father had kept his expression neutral, but I'd seen his jaw tighten. Judge Langford had continued, his voice taking on an edge. The trust was created by your parents, correct? Commander Hansen's grandparents. My father had nodded. And what was their intention in creating it? My father had started to answer, but the judge had cut him off. According to the trust document, which I've now read twice, it was created to provide for family members, to ensure their security and welfare. Your daughter has been risking her life in military service. I'd argue she embodies the trust's intent more than either of you. The silence that followed was absolute. I'd kept my eyes forward, not looking at my parents, not allowing any emotion to show on my face. Judge Langford had gathered his papers, his decision clearly made. I'm denying the petition to remove Lieutenant Commander Hansen from the trust. Furthermore, I'm ordering a full audit of trust management to ensure equitable treatment of all beneficiaries. Mr. and Mrs. Hansen, your attempt to disinherit your daughter reflects poorly on you both. This court stands adjourned. The gavel had come down with finality. Around me, people had started moving, gathering belongings, murmuring reactions. I'd remained in the witness box for a moment, processing what had just happened. Not victory exactly. Validation. The judge had seen through the legal arguments to the truth underneath. My attorney had approached the witness box, her expression carefully professional, but her eyes pleased. Well done, Commander. You kept your composure perfectly. I'd stood, suddenly exhausted, the adrenaline of the hearing wearing off. My parents had left quickly, Sandra Lyle shepherding them out a side door. I'd caught a glimpse of my mother's face as she'd passed, tears tracking through careful makeup. My father had kept his eyes straight ahead, his expression locked in the neutral mask he wore when he'd lost a case. Judge Langford had called my name as I'd moved toward the exit. Commander Hansen, a word? I'd approached the bench, coming to attention automatically. He'd smiled slightly at the gesture. At ease. I wanted to tell you something off the record. My son served in the Navy. He didn't make it home from his last deployment. Seeing you in that uniform, knowing what you've accomplished, it meant something to me. Don't let your parents diminish that. Some people will never understand what service means. That's their failure, not yours. I'd swallowed hard, the unexpected kindness hitting harder than my parents' dismissal. Thank you, Your Honor. That means a great deal. Keep serving, Commander. People like you are why the rest of us can sleep at night. He'd nodded once, then retreated to his chambers. I'd walked out of the courthouse into bright sunlight, the fog finally burned away. My attorney had been waiting on the steps, already on her phone arranging follow-up paperwork. When she'd finished the call, she'd turn to me. "How are you feeling?" I'd considered the question honestly. Tired. Relieved. Not happy exactly, but lighter. She'd understood. Justice doesn't always feel triumphant. Sometimes it just feels necessary. We'd gone over next steps: the trust audit, potential appeals from my parents, timeline for final resolution. I'd listened with half my attention, the other half already moving toward what came next. A message had buzzed on my phone, Marcus checking in. I'd texted back a simple thumbs up. Within minutes, my phone had lit up with messages from my team. The community moved fast when one of their own was in trouble. Chief Duran's message had simply said, "Damn right. Drinks when you're back." I'd smiled at that, the first genuine smile in days. My attorney and I had parted ways at her car. She'd shaken my hand formally, then pulled me into a brief hug. "You're a credit to the uniform, Commander. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise." I'd driven back to the hotel, changed into civilian clothes, and gone for a long run along the beach. The sun had been high, the water glittering, and I'd pushed myself until my legs burned and my lungs screamed. Physical pain to clear away the emotional residue. By the time I'd finished, I'd run 7 miles and reached something like peace. Not with my parents. With myself. With the choices I'd made and continued to make. The weeks after the hearing passed in a strange limbo. I'd taken leave to handle the trust audit and legal aftermath, staying in California but avoiding my parents' house. The audit itself was straightforward. A forensic accountant reviewed 5 years of trust management and found exactly what we'd expected. Meetings scheduled strategically, distributions delayed, decisions made without required beneficiary input. Nothing criminal, but a clear pattern of exclusion. The accountant's report recommended restructuring the trust management to prevent future conflicts. My father would remain a trustee, but major decisions would require independent oversight. My parents didn't contact me during this time. I'd half expected my mother to call, to attempt some kind of reconciliation or at least acknowledgement. Instead, silence. I'd heard through mutual acquaintances that my father was furious about the audit, calling it an invasion of privacy and government overreach. My mother had apparently stopped attending her usual social functions, embarrassed by the courtroom exposure. Their attorney had filed a motion to reconsider, which Judge Langford had denied within 24 hours. The matter was settled, legally if not emotionally. I spent the time reconnecting with other aspects of my life that had gotten lost in the conflict. I visited Marcus and his family in Coronado, had dinner with teammates I hadn't seen in months, attended a promotion ceremony for a junior officer I'd mentored. The SEAL community had closed ranks around me the way they always did, offering support without questions, presence without judgment. Chief Duran had taken me surfing one morning, and we'd sat on our boards beyond the break, watching the sunrise. "You good, Skipper?" he'd asked. I'd told him I was getting there. He'd nodded, satisfied. That's all anyone can ask. The trust restructuring finalized in early May. I received notification from my attorney that the audit had been completed, new management protocols established, and my status as beneficiary secured. The financial details were secondary to the broader victory. I'd been recognized, officially and legally, as a full member of the Hansen family regardless of my parents' feelings. The money from the trust would be useful eventually, but the validation mattered more. Someone with authority had looked at my life, my choices, my service, and said it counted. I'd been back at base for 2 weeks when my mother finally called. I almost didn't answer, seeing her name on the screen and feeling my stomach tighten. But curiosity won out. "Summer." Her voice sounded older, tired. "I wanted to talk to you. If you're willing." I'd stepped outside my office, finding a quiet spot near the water. "I'm listening." She'd taken a breath I could hear across the connection. "Your father and I have been talking." "Well, I've been talking." "He's been listening, mostly." The hearing, the audit, everything that came out. It forced us to look at things we'd avoided looking at. "What things?" I'd kept my voice neutral, not giving her easy absolution. "How we treated you. How we dismissed your choices. How we let pride and disappointment turn into something cruel." She'd paused, and I'd heard something crack in her voice. I told your father that we lost you years ago, and it was our fault. We were so focused on the life we'd imagined for you that we couldn't see the life you were actually building. A good life. An honorable life. The words landed carefully, genuine but tentative. I'd looked out at the ocean, watching waves roll in with mechanical precision. Why are you telling me this now? I'd asked. Because I'm tired of losing. Her voice had steadied. I've already lost most of my relationship with you. I don't want to lose all of it. I'm not asking for forgiveness. I know we don't deserve that yet. But I'm asking if we can start over. Slowly. If you're willing to try. I'd considered the request, weighing it against years of dismissal and the recent betrayal. Part of me wanted to say no, to let the relationship end with the legal victory. But another part, smaller but persistent, recognized that my mother was attempting something difficult, admitting failure, accepting responsibility. It wasn't a full apology, not yet, but it was movement. What about Dad? I'd asked. He's struggling with it. You humiliated him in court, in his professional world. His pride is wounded. But he knows what we did was wrong. He just needs time to say it. She'd hesitated. Would you consider coming to dinner again? No legal discussions, no arguments. Just dinner. Let us try to be your parents instead of your adversaries. I'd told her I'd think about it, which was more than I'd intended to offer. We'd ended the call without resolution, but without hostility either. Progress, maybe. Or just the beginning of progress. I'd stood by the water for a long time after, thinking about what family meant. The teams had taught me that family wasn't just blood. It was who showed up when things got hard, who had your back in the darkness. By that definition, my parents had failed spectacularly. But people could change. Not always, not easily, but sometimes. Commander Vaughn had found me an hour later, reading in the operations center. You're being too quiet, Hansen. Usually means you're processing something heavy. I'd smiled despite myself. He'd always had an uncanny ability to read his people. I'd told him about my mother's call, the dinner invitation, my uncertainty about how to respond. He'd listened without interrupting, then leaned back in his chair. Here's what I know, you can't fix other people. You can only control your own actions and reactions. If you go to that dinner, go with clear boundaries and no expectations. If you don't go, make peace with that choice. Either way, you've already won what mattered. You proved yourself in court and in life. Everything else is just details. The deployment orders came through in June. My team was heading back to the Gulf for a 6-month rotation, training partner forces and conducting counterterrorism operations. I'd received the orders with relief. Short duty had its place, but I was ready to get back to work, to the clarity of mission planning and execution. Before leaving, I'd accepted my mother's dinner invitation. Not forgiveness, not reconciliation, but a single meal. Small steps. The dinner had been awkward but civil. My father had been present but mostly silent, eating methodically and avoiding eye contact. My mother had tried too hard, filling silences with questions about my work that I mostly couldn't answer. But there'd been moments of genuine connection, my mother asking about my team, actually listening to my answers, my father reluctantly admitting that the judge's words had stung because they were accurate, a brief exchange about my grandmother, who'd created the trust, and what she would have thought of the whole situation. We'd ended the evening without drama, without resolution, but without open hostility. It was something. As I'd left, my father had stopped me at the door. Summer. He'd looked uncomfortable, his lawyer's eloquence failing him. What the judge said, about your medals, about what they mean. I looked them up. The circumstances of your Bronze Stars. What you did to earn them. He'd met my eyes briefly, then looked away. I didn't know. I should have asked. I'm sorry I didn't. It wasn't a full apology, not an acknowledgement of the broader betrayal. But it was the first time I'd heard him apologize for anything. I'd nodded once. Thank you for saying that. Then I'd left, driving back to base through the warm California night, feeling something settle in my chest. Not closure. Closure was a myth. But acceptance, maybe. The acceptance that some relationships couldn't be fully repaired, only managed. And that was okay. The deployment was routine by SEAL standards, which meant long stretches of planning punctuated by moments of controlled chaos. We ran operations I couldn't discuss, trained forces I couldn't name, worked in places that officially we'd never been. The rhythm of it felt right, felt like coming home. My team operated smoothly, each member knowing their role, trusting the others to execute. We brought everyone home safe, which was always the primary mission regardless of what the order said. During the deployment, I'd received occasional emails from my mother. Short updates about life at home, questions about my well-being that I answered vaguely due to operational security. She'd never asked when I was coming home, had learned not to expect detailed responses. But she'd kept writing, maintaining the connection. My father had sent one email, 3 lines long. Your mother tells me you're deployed again. Stay safe. We're thinking of you. It wasn't much, but it was more than nothing. 6 months in the Gulf gave me time to think about what I wanted long-term. I'd been serving for 11 years, had achieved my childhood goal of becoming a SEAL, and exceeded every expectation I'd had for myself. The Navy had been good to me, had given me purpose and family and accomplishments I was genuinely proud of. But military service wasn't forever for anyone. Eventually, I'd need to decide what came next. I wasn't ready for that decision yet, but I could feel it approaching. The question of legacy, of what mark I wanted to leave beyond the classified operations and the quiet professionalism. Marcus and I had discussed it one night during a lull between missions. We'd been sitting on the deck of the ship, watching stars that looked impossibly bright away from any light pollution. You thinking about getting out? He'd asked. I'd told him I didn't know. He'd nodded, understanding. I got another 5 years in me minimum. But you, Skipper, you've done enough. No shame in moving on to something else. I'd asked what he thought I should do. He'd laughed. Hell if I know. But whatever it is, you'll be good at it. You're good at everything you commit to. That's your gift and your curse. The team had rotated home in December, just before the holidays. We'd flown into San Diego on a cold, clear morning, exhausted and glad to be back on American soil. The families had been waiting, spouses, children, parents. I'd watched my teammates reunite with their people, the joy and relief obvious in every embrace. I'd been preparing to head to my truck alone when I'd seen her. My mother, standing near the back of the crowd, looking uncertain and out of place among the military families. She'd spotted me and waved tentatively. I'd walked over, surprised and suspicious. What are you doing here? She'd smiled, nervous but genuine. Your commander's office called me. Told me when you'd be landing. I thought you might like a ride home. I'd glanced around, half expecting my father to appear. Just you. She'd nodded. Just me. Your father wanted to come, but I thought this might be easier with just us. I'd studied her for a moment, looking for manipulation or agenda, but found only hope. Okay, I'd said finally. Let's go home. The drive had been easier than the dinner months before. My mother had asked real questions, had listened to my carefully worded answers about the deployment. She'd told me about changes at home. The trust audit had forced her and my father to rethink a lot of things, including their relationship. They'd started couples therapy, which I'd never expected to hear. We needed help, she'd admitted. Your father especially. He spent so long being right professionally that he forgot how to be wrong personally. The therapist is helping him see the difference. We'd stopped for coffee at a place near the base, sitting outside despite the December chill. My mother had wrapped her hands around her cup, gathering courage for something. I want to show you something, she'd said finally. She'd pulled out her phone, opening the photo app. I kept everything. Every photo you sent, every promotion announcement, every letter. I didn't respond the way I should have, but I kept them all. She'd scrolled through hundreds of images, me in training, in dress uniform, with my team, on ships and beaches and bases around the world. A catalog of my military life, carefully preserved. I'm proud of you, she'd said quietly. I was always proud. I just didn't know how to say it. Didn't know how to reconcile the daughter I'd imagined with the daughter you'd become. I'd felt something break loose in my chest, some tight knot I'd carried for years. Not forgiveness, not yet, but the beginning of understanding. You should have told me, I'd said. Even just once, you should have said you were proud. She'd nodded, tears tracking down her cheeks. I know. I'm telling you now. I'm sorry it took so long. I'm sorry it took a courtroom and a judge to make us see what we were doing to you. But I'm telling you now, I'm proud of who you are. What you've accomplished. The woman you've become. We'd sat in silence for a while, drinking coffee and watching traffic pass. Eventually, my mother had asked if I wanted to come home for Christmas. Not to stay, just to visit. My father wanted to try again, wanted to do better. I'd told her I'd think about it. She'd accepted that, asked nothing more. When she dropped me at my apartment, she'd hugged me carefully, like she was afraid I'd break. I love you, Summer. I always have. Even when I didn't show it well. I'd hugged her back, briefly, then grabbed my gear and headed inside. Progress, I'd thought. Slow, imperfect progress. Christmas had been surprisingly normal. I'd gone to my parents' house on Christmas Eve, staying for dinner and opening presents. My father had been more engaged than at the previous dinner, asking questions about my work, actually listening to the answers. He'd given me a book about military history, which felt like an attempt to bridge our worlds. My mother had given me a photo album, all the pictures from her phone, printed and organized chronologically. 11 years of my military career preserved. I'd spent an hour that evening going through it, remembering missions and teammates and versions of myself I'd almost forgotten. As I'd prepared to leave, my father had asked if we could talk privately. We'd gone to his study, the room where he dismissed my concerns about the trust months earlier. He'd poured 2 glasses of scotch, handed me one, then stood awkwardly by his desk. I've been trying to figure out how to say this for months. The therapist suggested I just be direct. He'd taken a drink, gathering courage. I was wrong. About everything. About dismissing your service, about the trust, about trying to force you into a life you didn't want. I spent so long being disappointed that you weren't the daughter I'd imagined that I failed to see the daughter you actually are. The judge was right. Those medals you wear, they mean you've done things I can't imagine. You've served with honor. And I've been an ass about all of it. The apology had been clumsy but sincere. I'd accepted it with a nod, not trusting myself to speak. My father had continued, his lawyer's control slipping. I looked up your commendations. The Bronze Star citations. Summer, you saved lives. Multiple times. You led people through situations that would have broken most officers. And I called it playing soldier. I'm ashamed of that. Deeply ashamed. He'd set down his glass, his hand shaking slightly. I don't expect you to forgive me immediately. I don't deserve that. But I want you to know I see you now. I see who you are and what you've done. And I'm proud. More proud than I've been of anything in my own career. I'd finished my scotch, letting the burn clear my throat. Thank you for saying that. It matters. I'd paused, considering what came next. I don't know if we can fix this completely. Too much has happened. But I'm willing to try if you are. Small steps. No expectations. My father had nodded, relief evident on his face. Small steps. I'll take it. We'd shaken hands, formal but genuine, then rejoined my mother in the living room. The rest of the evening had passed quietly, 3 people trying to figure out how to be a family after years of fracture. Spring came with new orders. I'd been selected for a training command position, which meant short duty and the opportunity to shape the next generation of SEAL officers. It was an honor and a sign that the Navy saw leadership potential beyond operational assignments. Commander Vaughn had congratulated me, noting that few officers got training commands at my rank. You've earned it, Hansen. Pass on what you've learned. Make the next batch better than we were. The position would keep me stateside for at least 2 years, which felt both limiting and liberating. Time to rebuild relationships, to figure out what life looked like beyond constant deployments. My parents had been cautiously pleased when I'd told them about the assignment. My mother had asked if it meant I'd be around more, maybe for holidays and birthdays. I'd told her probably, no promises. My father had asked about my career trajectory, what came after training command. I'd explained the typical path, command of a SEAL team, potentially squadron command, staff positions if I stayed in long enough. He listened with genuine interest, asking informed questions. Small progress, but real. The training command itself was challenging in different ways than operational assignments. I was responsible for teaching advanced tactics to officers who'd already completed BUD/S, helping them transition from team members to team leaders. It required patience and teaching skills I'd had to develop quickly. But watching junior officers grasp complex concepts, seeing them gain confidence and competence, provided a satisfaction different from mission success. I was building something lasting, not just completing operations that would remain classified forever. Marcus had rotated to a different team, but we'd stayed in touch. He'd called one evening after I'd spent 12 hours running leadership scenarios with a particularly difficult class. "How's the teaching gig, Skipper?" I'd told him it was humbling, that explaining concepts I'd internalized was harder than executing them. He'd laughed. "Welcome to the world of training commands. Every operator thinks they can teach until they actually have to do it. You'll figure it out. You always do." We'd talked for an hour, catching up on mutual friends, discussing changes in the community, the comfortable conversation of people who'd been through hell together. My relationship with my parents continued its slow evolution. We'd established a pattern: dinner once a month, phone calls every few weeks, honest communication about expectations and boundaries. My father had started sending articles about military policy and strategy, his way of engaging with my world. My mother had visited the base once, met some of my colleagues, seen where I worked. She'd been nervous, but genuinely interested, asking questions and listening to answers. We weren't close, might never be close in the way some families were. But we were connected, which was more than we'd had before the hearing. Judge Langford had sent me a letter in March, forwarded through the courthouse. He'd written to tell me he'd followed my career through public records, had seen my promotion to training command. "You're making a difference in ways your parents might never fully understand," he'd written. "But people like me who've served, we know. Keep leading. Keep teaching. The country needs more officers like you." I'd kept the letter in my desk, pulling it out occasionally when the teaching felt frustrating or pointless. Validation from someone who understood what service meant. The first anniversary of the hearing passed quietly. I'd marked it privately, thinking about everything that had changed in a year. The legal battle that had validated my existence. The slow rebuilding of family relationships. The new assignment that challenged me differently than combat ever had. I'd walked on the beach that evening, watching sunset paint the ocean in colors that reminded me of deployments. A year ago, I'd been fighting for recognition. Now I had it, and the fight had transformed into something more complex. The work of actually being a family, of teaching the next generation, of figuring out who I was beyond the uniform. Marcus had texted that night, "1 year since you made your old man realize he raised a badass. Cheers to that." I'd smiled and sent back a beer emoji. Chief Duran had called, drunk and sentimental. "You changed things, Skipper. Not just for you, for all of us. Showed us you can fight the system and win. Proud to serve with you." I'd thanked him, told him to drink water and go to bed. My mother had sent flowers to my office, a small arrangement with a card that read, "1 year since we started learning how to be a real family. Thank you for giving us the chance." I'd kept the flowers on my desk until they wilted, a reminder of imperfect progress. Summer turned to fall. My training class graduated, moving on to team assignments. Several officers sought me out privately to thank me for the leadership lessons, for teaching them how to command with empathy and efficiency. One young lieutenant had said, "You showed us that being tough doesn't mean being harsh. That discipline and care aren't opposites." That's going to stick with me. I'd felt a satisfaction deeper than any mission success. This was legacy, knowledge passed on, traditions maintained, the community strengthened. My father had attended the graduation ceremony, the first time he'd seen me in a military setting. He'd stood in the back, watching me address the graduating officers, award their completion certificates, shake their hands. Afterward, he'd approached carefully, clearly moved. "I've never seen you work before. Never seen you in your element. Summer, you commanded that room. Those officers respect you genuinely." It was remarkable to watch. We'd gotten coffee afterward, just the two of us, and talked for hours. Really talked, maybe for the first time in my adult life. About his career, my career, the different kinds of leadership we'd pursued. He'd admitted he'd spent so much time building his legal practice that he'd missed actually knowing his daughter. I'd admitted I'd spent so much time proving I didn't need his approval that I'd missed the opportunity to share my life with him. The conversation hadn't fixed everything. Decades of distance couldn't be erased in one afternoon. But it established something new: mutual respect, genuine interest, the foundation of an adult relationship between two people who'd been strangers despite sharing blood. As we'd parted, my father had hugged me properly for the first time I could remember. "I'm proud of you, Summer. Truly proud. Not of an idea of you, but of the actual person you've become." I'd hugged him back, feeling something fundamental shift. Acceptance, finally. Not just of me, but between us. Winter brought the second Christmas since the hearing, and this one felt genuinely comfortable. I'd spent Christmas Eve and Christmas Day at my parents' house, joining extended family who'd heard about the courtroom drama but had the grace not to mention it. My aunt had pulled me aside at one point, saying quietly, "Your parents talk about you all the time now. Your service, your accomplishments. It's like they finally woke up and realized who you are." I'd thanked her, appreciating the observation. The family dynamic had shifted noticeably. Where before my military career had been a source of polite dismissal, now it was acknowledged and respected. New Year's came with reflection. I'd been serving for 12 years, had accomplished more than I'd dreamed possible when I'd enlisted at 19. The question Commander Vaughn had planted months earlier grew more insistent. What came next? I loved the Navy, loved the SEAL community, loved the sense of purpose and mission. But I was also aware that military service couldn't be forever. Eventually, I'd need to transition, to find new purpose in civilian life. The training command had shown me I could teach, could lead in non-operational settings. That felt like preparation for something, though I wasn't sure what yet. Marcus had made command of his own team, a promotion I'd celebrated from across the country. We'd video called after his change of command ceremony, him still in dress uniform, grinning with the particular joy of a milestone reached. "You paved the way, Skipper. Showed them women could lead SEALs effectively. Made it easier for the ones coming after you." I deflected the praise, but privately felt proud. Representation mattered. Proof mattered. Every woman who succeeded made it slightly easier for the next one. That was legacy too, opening doors, clearing paths. My parents had started attending SEAL community events when invited. My mother had come to a memorial service for a fallen operator, standing with other families, witnessing the grief and honor that marked our losses. She'd cried openly, understanding for the first time what the community meant, what sacrifice looked like in practical terms. My father had attended a promotion ceremony, watched junior officers receive their new ranks, seen the traditions and rituals that bound the military together. These experiences were changing their perception, giving them context for choices they'd once dismissed. In February, I'd received orders for my next assignment, executive officer of a SEAL team, stepping stone to commanding my own team. It was the progression I'd hoped for, validation that the training command hadn't derailed my operational career. Commander Vaughn had called to congratulate me. "Full circle, Hansen. You'll be back leading operators in the field. Make them better. Make the teams better. That's the job." I'd accepted the assignment with excitement and some trepidation. Executive officer meant significant responsibility, meant proving myself again in a new role. The change of assignment also meant leaving California, moving to Virginia where the team was based. My parents had been quietly disappointed but understanding. My mother had helped me pack, sorting through belongings and asking about my plans. "You'll come visit?" she'd asked. I'd promised I would. My father had given me a gift before I'd left, a leather journal, expensive and understated. "Write down the things you can't tell us," he'd said. "The missions, the decisions, the moments that matter. Even if no one else ever reads it, you'll have the record. You'll remember what you did and why." It was perhaps the most thoughtful gift he'd ever given me, acknowledgement that my life contained experiences he'd never fully understand, but respected anyway. The move east happened in March. I'd packed my truck and driven across the country, taking 5 days to make the journey. The cross-country drive gave me time to process everything that had happened since the hearing. 2 years of transformation, legal victory, family reconciliation, career progression, personal growth. I'd entered that courtroom fighting for recognition. I'd received it, but also discovered that recognition wasn't an endpoint. It was a beginning, a foundation for building something more substantial. The new team welcomed me professionally. My reputation had preceded me. First female SEAL officer to make training command, Bronze Star recipient, known for tactical competence and strong leadership. The team commander, a seasoned 05 named Sullivan, had briefed me clearly. I don't care about your gender or your history. I care about mission success and taking care of operators. You handle your job, we'll handle ours, and everyone goes home safe. It was the clearest statement of expectations I could have asked for. The team sergeant major, a grizzled chief with 25 years in, had been more direct. Ma'am, half these kids weren't sure about serving under a female officer. Then they looked up your record. You'll be fine. Just be yourself. The first few months were intensive, learning the team's procedures, building relationships with key personnel, understanding the operational tempo and mission set. I'd deployed before, but executive officer carried different responsibilities. I was responsible for operational planning, logistics coordination, personnel management. The team commander made strategic decisions. I ensured those decisions got executed effectively. It was challenging and exhausting and exactly what I'd wanted. My parents had visited once in those first months, staying in a hotel and taking me to dinner. My father had been fascinated by the base, asking questions about training facilities and operational procedures that I mostly couldn't answer due to classification. My mother had simply seemed glad to see me settled. We'd talked about their life, my life, the careful rebuilding of our relationship. Your therapist must be pleased, I'd said to my mother. She'd smiled. She says we're making exceptional progress for people who started from such a damaged place. I think that's therapist speak for, you were really broken, but you're fixing it. Summer arrived with deployment orders. The team was rotating to Africa for a counterterrorism mission, 6 months of training partner forces and conducting direct action operations as needed. It was exactly the kind of deployment I'd thrived on before, complex, important, operationally challenging. I'd called my parents to tell them, giving them the minimal information security allowed. My father had simply said, be safe. Come home. My mother had cried, but kept it together, telling me she loved me and was proud of me. Neither had tried to talk me out of it, had tried to minimize the danger. They'd simply accepted it as part of who I was. The deployment itself was successful by every measure. We trained 3 partner force battalions, conducted 24 successful operations, and brought everyone home without serious injury. I'd grown into the executive officer role, had learned to balance operational demands with personnel welfare, had made decisions that kept people safe while accomplishing the mission. The team commander had filed fitness reports praising my leadership, recommending me for team command when eligible. I'd come home in December feeling accomplished and ready for whatever came next. My parents had met me at the airport this time, both of them, standing with a small welcome home sign my mother had made. It was the kind of thing military families did, the kind of thing my parents had never done before. I'd hugged them both, genuinely glad to see them, feeling something fundamental had healed. Not perfectly, not completely, but substantially. We'd driven to their house, where they'd prepared dinner and invited some of my extended family. It felt like coming home to family, not just to a house I'd grown up in. That night, after everyone had left, the 3 of us had sat in the living room with coffee. My father had asked about the deployment in the vague terms security allowed. I'd told them about training missions, about the satisfaction of watching partner forces gain competence, about the responsibility of keeping people safe in hostile territory. My mother had asked if I'd been scared. I'd admitted I had been, sometimes, but fear was just information to be processed and managed. My father had said quietly, I don't know how you do it. The responsibility, the danger. I manage corporate litigation. The stakes are money. Your stakes are lives. I'd told him every job had its pressures, but he'd shaken his head. Not like yours. What you do matters in ways my work never will. I understand that now. The conversation had continued late into the night, three people finally understanding each other, finally building the relationship that should have existed all along. When I'd finally left for my hotel, exhausted but content, my mother had hugged me tightly. I'm so glad you're home safe. I'm so glad we didn't lose you before we learned how to love you properly. I'd hugged her back, feeling the truth of it. We'd almost lost each other completely. But we hadn't. Sometimes that was enough. Standing on the courthouse steps 3 years after the hearing, I reflected on everything that had changed. The legal battle that had forced truth into the light. The painful rebuilding of family relationships. The continued growth of my military career. I'd come to this building wearing my uniform as armor, fighting for recognition from people who should have given it freely. I'd won that fight, but the victory had been the beginning, not the end. Real change took time, took effort, took both sides willing to do the work. My parents had done the work. So had I. And now we had something that looked like family, imperfect but real. The trident on my chest still caught the light, reminder of the life I'd built without anyone's permission. But now I also had their support, their pride, their genuine love. I'd earned both, the military career through sacrifice and skill, the family reconciliation through honesty and patience. Standing there in the spring sunshine, I felt something I'd rarely allowed myself to feel. Complete. The woman I'd chosen to become, finally recognized by the people who'd given me life. It wasn't perfect, but it was enough. That's where I drew the line, and it held. If this resonated, like, subscribe, and share it with someone who needs a push to stand their ground. Questions for you. Have you ever had family turn a private conflict into a public one? How did you respond? Would you have walked into that courtroom in uniform, or kept it low-key? Why? What's one boundary you wish you'd set sooner with family? If a judge had asked to hear your side, what's the one fact you'd lead with? Do you believe trust can be rebuilt after a legal betrayal, or is distance the safer choice? What's one action you'll take this week to protect your peace? Drop your answers below. I read every comment.